Time to go interplanetary. Before you watch this video, I'm going to assume you have knowledge of how to get out to the moons in the Kerbin system. If you haven't, go over to the video A Very Simple Craft to Minimus and Back. Links on the screen. Before you go anywhere, you need to get the planets into the right location. To do this, you build a clock. A clock is a very simple craft that sits on the ground and allows you to time accelerate at max speed. We are now using the clock to time accelerate Kerbin and Duna into the right place so we can launch our mission. And then drag out the prograde marker, and it should come close to Duna with a bit of fine tuning. Now I'm going to put on your screen a fact sheet about how to get out to Duna with all the information you will need to get there and back. Once you have an intersect with Duna, what you want to do is time accelerate out of Kerbin's sphere of influence. And once you're out of the sphere of influence, you want to set up a new maneuver node to do your fine tuning, and as we're going to aero brake, get as close as possible. This can be very difficult as the maneuver nodes are very touchy. You can click on the PE marker inside Duna's sphere of influence to see it change in real time as you move the maneuver. Once all that's set up, what you need to do is time accelerate into Duna's sphere of influence. When you arrive, you want to change your orbit so it hits Duna's atmosphere at about 13,000 meters. This will slow you down sufficiently enough to be captured around the planet and save you a lot of fuel. When you arrive at Duna, you can slow down in 1 pass or 2. In this video, I've chosen to slow down in 2 because the poor Kerbal will experience less G-forces the slower we do it. As Duna's atmosphere is so much lower than Kerbin's, you're going to need to help by opening the parachute and turning on your engines to slow down. You want to be going as slow as possible when the parachute fully deploys, which is very close to the ground. But till then, you're under atmospheric drag. When you get closer to the ground, you can activate your parachute, which will come out in semi-deployed mode, which will slow you down a little. To deploy the parachute, you will need to either change your staging or right-click on the parachute, which for my case is on the top of the craft. To do this, you right-click on the parachute and click deploy. When your parachute is deployed, you want to regulate your speed via your engine. So you want to turn it on and start to drop your speed. You basically want to keep it on full blast, but not dropping your speed below 100 meters a second. And when the parachute opens, regulate your speed so you touch down under 10 meters a second. After a quick fly around Duna with the Kerbal who needed to stretch his legs, we start thinking about going home. To do this, we need to either switch back to the clock to time accelerate, or use the craft that's landed to time accelerate up to our launch window. When you have the planets aligned properly, you need to fly straight up to get out of the atmosphere as fast as possible. I chose to turn over at 10k up, fly over at the 90-degree vector to put myself back into an orbit, and then once I'm in orbit, I'm going to fly back to Kerbin. For this maneuver, I need to start at sunrise and drag the prograde marker out until I get an intersect with Kerbin. Again, I want to get it as close as possible so I can aero brake, but once I get into Kerbin's sphere of influence, I will adjust it again. Just a reminder for old and new players, when you first start your burn, you do it watching the craft. The reason for this is because you want to see if you're falling back inside the planet. Now, I wasn't paying attention, so I thought I'd leave it in. So all that's left now is to accelerate up to speed, and then time accelerate back into Kerbin, and then land using the parachute that you have repacked on Duna. If you haven't repacked the parachute by now, you need to repack it before you finish the flight. When you're back in Kerbin's sphere of influence, you need to add a maneuver node and shift your orbit down so the orbit passes through the atmosphere of Kerbin. You want to make sure you have grabbed the blue marker and not the retrograde marker. Next planet on our list to visit is Eve. Eve has a very high atmosphere and runs in a different orbit orientation to Kerbin. So when you leave Kerbin, you need to use an extra maneuver node, which makes the maneuver more complicated. You need to create a maneuver node, goes out to Eve's orbit, and then once you have done that, you need to place a maneuver node on the descending or ascending node, whichever one is closest to you in your orbit path, and grab the pink marker to change your orbit's orientation to match Eve's. By balancing these two maneuver nodes, you can go out to Eve. It takes longer than it does to get to Duna. Once you have got out to Eve, you need to do another orbital correction so you make sure you pass in the atmosphere of Eve. And then when you're in the atmosphere, you need to ditch your craft, as from Eve there will be no return due to its thick atmosphere, unless you have built a very specialized craft. When you arrive on Eve, you will find your parachutes work much more effectively, because the atmosphere is so much denser there. The next planet we will visit is called Eeloo, or Pluto. Eeloo is very far away and very small, having very little gravity of its own. To get out to Eeloo, you need to use 2 maneuver nodes. The second one to change your orbit's inclination. Due to using 2 maneuver nodes, you may need to edit both maneuver nodes to get the orbit right. Once you've done your first burn, that will only leave you with your last maneuver node, the one at the inclination change. You can change that one around to your heart's content, but the more you need to change it, the more fuel you will use. Eeloo does not have an atmosphere, so you cannot aero brake. You need to slow yourself down with engines only. This uses a lot more fuel than you would do aero braking, so you need to pack more fuel. In my little craft, I didn't pack quite enough fuel, so when it came to landing I started to get a little worried. But then I realized that Eeloo has a very low gravity, so my Kerbinaut's RCS pack may be able to keep him alive. But luckily my Kerbinaut had his RCS pack and managed to just land safely.
You call that safe?
Then we visited Moho. Moho requires 2 maneuver nodes to get out to, and I'll put all the information to get there on screen. You will need a bigger craft than the one I've been flying though. Next planet we visited was Dres. I'm going to put the orbital information up on screen. It's pretty easy to get to, but it does require 2 maneuver nodes, like Eeloo. Next on our list of planets to visit is Jool and Laythe. Jool is like Jupiter, so you cannot land there, but Laythe is an archipelago, so we want to go and visit that. Doing this can be more complicated than getting to Eve, as you will require an aero brake and an aero capture. As per usual, when you arrive in the sphere of influence of a planet with atmosphere, you need to shift your orbit into the atmosphere. Jool has a very thick atmosphere, so you only want to skim the top of it to slow yourself down. So we want to aero brake lightly through Jool, so we become captured around the body. But we want to travel far away out from Jool so we can change our orbit with the least amount of fuel required to position ourselves for an aero capture on Laythe. Once we're captured around Jool, we need to fly out to our apoap. We need to accelerate our orbit so we intersect Laythe as it flies past. Laythe is on a very fast orbit compared to how slow we will be travelling. We will be coming in about 10,000 meters off the ground, which will sufficiently slow us down enough for landing. If you wish to pick your landing site, you need to be a lot more careful with your aero braking. Now I hope you understand how to get out to other planets. If there are any questions, hit me up in the comments below. Remember to leave a like if you like this style of fast talking, fast editing type of video. Now I'm going to leave on screen, in order, the planets and all their information. I also have in the description a link to all the information I've compiled for this video, so if you wish to print it out, feel free.